Peace community, peace community. You already know. If you're new, welcome to the community. If you're a part of our community, you already know. Welcome back. Listen, man, you know it's many parts to this, to the slave trade, to the Negro slave trade. Today, I'm gonna get into many parts, but one of the parts I'm gonna be getting into today is the Argentinian Negro slave trade of 1532. So we're going to be going into Argentina, many cultures, many different spots, not just America, the Caribbean, everywhere around the world experienced parts of slavery, but we're just not really knowledgeable on it, or we're really not taught it in school. So hopefully you can learn a little bit more. Like I said, I think that all of us come from one thing. You know, I love when our Spanish people identify with Black people and we identify as one thing. I'm into the Brown Unity. I created a group called Brown Unity. Brown and Brown Unity, we must understand that we have similarities, we have commonalities, we even have the same kinds of spirituality. So we have to understand that we come from one rooted source. So let's get into this video. Make sure you drop your likes on the way in. Salute to anybody that want to get real knowledge and just don't come on YouTube to just spew shite all day. Let's get into this video, y'all.
Voy porque no quiero morirme en un socavón, porque no quiero morirme en un socavón. Negra he sido, negra soy, negra vengo y negra voy, negra ayer, mañana y hoy, pero aunque mi amo me mate, esa mina no voy, porque no quiero morirme en un socavón, porque no quiero morirme en un socavón.
How does history get erased? One erases history by stripping people of the truth about who they are and where they come from. Men and women arrived to Latin America. These were a people brutally tortured and used for economic gain in the name of development. They were enslaved and told they could no longer speak their languages or practice their religions. They were removed from the only homes they knew. Hundreds of years later, descendants would demand that these stories be excavated from the ruins, and thus began again the search for home. Afro-Latinos, the untaught story, is the recounting of a history that for too long has been left out of the historical text and narratives. There has been much study, research, and emphasis placed on the history of slavery in the United States.
La diáspora afro-latina tiene sí ciertas particularidades que lo hace un poco diferente a la diáspora del sur de los Estados Unidos.
Yet, the African diaspora in Latin America is rarely mentioned or included in the dialogue.
Desgraciadamente debo decir que en África no conocemos la historia de los afrolatinos.
Te podría decir que el 80% de la población no sabe que hay gente de influencia africana en México.
I think there's widespread Ignorance as to whether African Americans know about this history? No. I frequently give presentations on this, and I find that this is the first time that they've heard about it.
Over 12 million enslaved Africans were forcibly brought to Latin America, and an estimated 500,000 were brought to the United States over the span of 400 years. Why then is the African diaspora in Latin America not taught in educational institutions from elementary school to the university level?
Hay momentos en la historia peruana en que la historia como discurso se teje, pero ahí no están los afros.
Por ejemplo, en las escuelas, la mención de los africanos comienza desde que llegan como esclavizados. Y esto es bien importante que lo aclaremos. Digo esclavizados, no esclavos, porque ellos no eran esclavos. Ellos eran seres humanos libres que fueron esclavizados.
Aún no hay dentro de lo que es la enseñanza oficial un interés que nosotros necesitamos que sea desde arriba, ¿no? Desde las autoridades principales de nuestro país, para que se difunda, que los niños negros, que las niñas negras sepan su historia.
Many children and adults in Latin America do not know anything about Africa, buying into stereotypes, oftentimes unaware that it is a continent.
Todavía dentro de esa concepción de mundo, el niño no te piensa que África es un continente. El niño te piensa África como un país.
África es un país que la gente aguanta mucha hambre.
¿Cómo me imagino África? Un país de muchas necesidades.
Es que no es que la han dejado afuera. Nunca fue parte de la historia. Ese es el asunto.
Afro-Latinos are the descendants of enslaved Africans who were brought by force and dispersed throughout Latin America. Today, there are more than 150 million Afro-Latinos in Latin America, of which 90 million live in Brazil. But does this mean that only people who are black can claim African roots?
Muchas personas confunden que el negro solo sea la piel. Puede haber un negro con los ojos claros. La piel negra es solo una característica de lo que es el hombre negro.
For Latin Americans, there is something prestigious and honorable about identifying with being descendants of Europeans. What has been taught is that the royal bloodline from Spain is worthy of respect, pride, and honor. The indigenous is seen as something mystical and exotic, while the African root has always been associated with slavery, poverty, and all things lack.
The sound of racism. This political advert aired for 2 days on local radio stations. It's too racially offensive for us to broadcast it in full. But it describes members of this Ecuadorian black community as good-for-nothing people, cockroaches, and much more. Cockroaches, and much more.
Less than 5 years later, we're leaving people fleeing the same conflict to drown in the sea, while giving a woman space in a national newspaper to refer to them as cockroaches. While giving a woman space in a national newspaper to refer to them as cockroaches. And when you refer to humans as cockroaches, that is a mandate for murder. Let's be clear about that. The moment human beings become non-human, that is a mandate for murder, and there's a long historical parallel of that. The idea that white is right isn't just a European idea, it's an idea that has had insidious implications, because no matter what, the 700 people that were left to drown off the coast of the Mediterranean, were they white human beings, they wouldn't have been left to drown. And they certainly wouldn't be called cockroaches.
An investigation is underway to determine who was behind the advert. It has since been taken off the air. Local candidates deny any responsibility. But the damage has been done.
I'm outraged. What they did isn't politics, it's racism.
Since blacks arrived in Ecuador from West Africa in the 16th century, they have done the hardest jobs. A government study in 2003 said that over 92% of blacks do not have access to basic services.
Queremos cambiar ese lema de que negro y malo es lo mismo, ¿sí? Que si ponen una bomba, noche negra en Bogotá, conciencia negra, futuro negro, trabajé como negro.
History books refer to Africans only as slaves. There is no mention that some Africans in their territories were kings and queens or men and women of great wisdom. Nor does it mention that African kingdoms themselves participated in the slave trade, trading slaves from other kingdoms with European settlers. This story cannot be told without starting in Africa. Contrary to popular belief, Europeans did not enter into the depths of Africa to kidnap people and turn them into slaves. African kingdoms dominated the territories, enslaving small groups of people from other kingdoms. Kingdoms such as Ashanti, Dahomey, Oyo, Benin, and Congo were some of the most powerful. When trade with Europeans began, it benefited the African royals, and the elites grew more powerful. From this trade, an estimated 100 million Africans were taken from Africa and dispersed among every continent.
Salió lo mejor de África. África empezó muy mal. Empezó con una sangría humana.
The colonizers knew exactly which humans were of value and had their pick of the finest Africans.
Entre un promedio de 15 a 45 años, ese fue como el rango de edad de las personas que vinieron. Por eso hoy se dice que África es el continente más pobre del mundo, pero es porque su fuerza de trabajo fue extraída. En la medida en que se les extrae su fuerza de trabajo, solamente queda la niñez y la tercera edad, es decir, los abuelos.
Los traficantes de esclavos no se aventuraban a elegir a un hombre flaco ni a una mujer enferma. Tenían que ser jóvenes y robustos. Por tanto, se extrajo de sus hogares a lo mejor del pueblo africano.
The population of enslaved Africans came from many ethnic groups. The Africans who arrived in what is now known as Latin America came mostly from Central and Western Africa. Ethnic groups like the Mandingo, Ashanti, Ewe Fon, Mina, Nago, and Igbo were just a few of those brought over. Cuba was a gathering point for the Arara, Yoruba, Carabali, and Bakongo people. People from Carabali and Yoruba were also scattered throughout Latin America, though it was in Cuba that they came together and maintained their culture. Approximately 240,000 were Carabalis, 200,000 Araras, 400,000 Congoleses, and 275,000 Yoruba people would be enslaved and brought to Cuba, causing the fall of the Oyo Empire in Africa.
Ocurre que una de las técnicas que utilizaban los conquistadores era nunca tener a los esclavizados de un mismo grupo étnico, sino tenerlos de diferentes lugares para que tuvieran diferentes lenguas y tuvieran dificultades en la comunicación y por lo tanto se les hicieran más difíciles las conspiraciones.
The plan failed. They rebelled. Enslaved Africans joined together and maintained their religious practices as a form of resistance. The Bantu ethnic group was one of the largest groups enslaved. The Bantu had many subgroups, such as the Bakongos and others that were brought from Mexico to Argentina. This heritage is preserved in the Bantu songs found in Argentina.
Un 65% de los traídos hacia Montevideo eran de origen bantú, es decir, Angola, Mozambique, Congos.
The Bantu influence is also seen in Haitian voodoo. The Palenquero language in Colombia also has its roots in Bantu.
Pané nubio viral en guasuto. Maese tan hace trecusa. Monacito de taquilán de Uriacuyo. Etan leuncusa de tradición suto.
In Panama, they play and dance to los congos.
Las tradiciones vienen de África y no solamente tenemos el baile congo, tenemos otros bailes, pero el congo sí nace aquí en Portobelo. Es el baile que habló y que hizo muchas cosas para poder defender la libertad en su momento y lograr lo que hoy día somos.
The Dominican Republic also has its congos.
Eso es africano, eso es desde cuando los esclavos.
In a span of 400 years, an estimated 7 million enslaved Africans were brought to South America. 5 million were taken to Brazil. Over 4 million arrived to the West Indies, and 300,000 slaves were shipped to Central America. African women contributed greatly to the history and culture of Latin America. One way to honor these women is through gastronomy. In almost all Latin American countries, there is a dish of African origin. Markets like this one in Cartagena, Colombia, offer many foods of African descent. The coconut rice and fried fish are common in Afro-Latino areas. During the slavery era, African women cooked for their masters and prepared for them the best meats and fresh foods. The leftovers were used to feed themselves, the men, and the children.
Los patrones, pues, a los esclavos, que le decían como que come si quieres, ¿no? Y le daban la menudencia. Pero los negros esclavos, si había papa y el mondongo, los otros aderezos, de ahí sacaban el caucao.